Cassidy didn't want the old woman to touch it, no matter how sweet or welcoming she had been. She didn't want to be rude either, but the chain just seemed too precious to let anyone else fondle. I'm sorry, it's not. She tried to collect herself, briefly remembering her grandmother's warning about showing people. When she looked up, the old lady's bony fingers were mere inches away from the necklace, and an odd sheen glinted from her decrepit eyes. Quickly, Cassidy sat back in her chair, distancing herself as much as possible from the old woman's skeletal fingers, and replaced the necklace in its usual position under her shirt. It's just that today is the day I heard of her death, and it's the last thing she gave me before she died. It's kind of sacred. I'm sorry if I seem rude. Oh. The old woman stiffened and sat up straighter, trying to hide her compulsion to tear the necklace off her new guest. It's just such a beautiful piece of jewelry. I think it's a shame you hide it away like that. But if that ever changes, you know where to find me, said the old woman, winking. An hour passed in an idle manner before Cassidy began to feel tired. The whiskey had numbed her pain just enough, and the fire was almost as inviting as she remembered her grandmother's. Cassidy wondered at her luck of finding such a sweet old lady that reminded her of her grandmother just when she needed aid. Maybe this is the kind of magic Grandma was talking about, she thought to herself. Happily cleaning up the cabin, the old woman began to hum. The tune sounded so familiar, almost like the lullaby her grandma used to put her to bed as a child. The only difference in this woman's tune and her grandmother's was a slight change in the rhythm of the melody. While her grandmother's always sent her off into a peaceful sleep with a lilting hum, this song sounded more ominous and sad. She shrugged off the initial feeling as she settled into the chair a little deeper, drifting to dreamland while the old woman continued her song. Gasping for air, Cassidy reeled from the dream she had just escaped. Vivid dreams of golden snakes squeezing the life out of her had caused her to toss and turn all night. When she awoke, the cabin was empty. She began to search, but in vain. The old woman had disappeared. With a heavy head that she supposed was from a hangover from a bit of whiskey the woman had put in her coffee the night before, Cassidy went to the bathroom in search of headache medicine. She pulled her necklace out from under the dirty shirt she'd have to wear again today and proceeded to the bathroom, gaining comfort by simply feeling the rubies that studded the chain. Upon entering the bathroom, she glanced at the mirror, which revealed a shocking sight. Her hair had completely changed during the night. Before, her strawberry blonde hair had fallen in soft curls at her shoulder. Now the natural blonde had formed into heavy locks of gold. But it wasn't merely the color of her hair that resembled gold. The tresses were like the delicate chains from her necklace, studded with rubies along the length. She tugged at the strands and grew furious that they simply wouldn't come out. Indeed, the harder she yanked, the more tears came to her eyes, but the golden tresses stayed firmly anchored in her scalp. Horrified, she tried to shake herself out of it, attempting to pretend that this was a hallucination, or joke, or something. Anything rational would have worked at that moment. Surely her grandmother's insistence of the reality of magic had no real basis. However, the more she tried to convince herself, the more hysterical she grew. With the growing hysteria, bitter anger began to boil at the old woman who had apparently drugged her and left her with a head like the illegitimate child of Midas and Medusa. Suddenly, it appeared as if there were actually snakes moving in her hair. The red locks of hair that had not been transformed into gold began to curl and tighten as if alive. The gold chains likewise began to move and coil, changing to a bright red as if the gold were put under heat. Like a halo of fire, the living mass licked out towards the nearest objects, trying to consume everything in the blaze surrounding her head. The nightmare from last night came back vividly in flashes of memory. Maggie, holding a clump of hair while looking over the body of her grandmother sitting in front of the fire for the last time, and that frozen smile on her grandmother's face, mischievously curling to her eyes, and Maggie's rage when she realized the chain wasn't there. Cassidy gagged, fighting back the bile that seared her throat. The sudden insight that Maggie was the same witch that had cursed her grandmother was too much for Cassidy. She did what any normal girl would do in the situation. Run until she couldn't anymore. Once her blind terror subsided, she was able to rest and catch a breath. As she began to calm down, the wild tresses on her head responded to her change in emotions, slowly unwinding and laying flat against her head. Before going further, she placed the necklace back under her shirt and gathered her strange new hair into the knit cap on her head, trying to hide the gold. Magic is real, her grandmother had told her. She'd been warned that the necklace would bring a burden, that there was a curse, yet she couldn't believe she'd fallen into such a bizarre and tragic fate. Cassidy began to search again for the way out of this labyrinth of trees, trying to remain calm and not stir the demons that were bound to her skull. After aimlessly walking through the woods, knowing neither time nor direction, Cassidy stumbled onto a small country road. The farther she walked down the road, the less hope she had that she'd come across someone to help her. A distant rumbling, signaling the approach of a car, finally rejuvenated her spirits. An old white truck slowed to a stop near her, and a hand motioned out of the window for her to get in. Thankful for any help, Cassidy jumped in the car and thanked the man as she buckled up. Unknown to Cassidy, a few golden locks fell out of her hat as she shuffled into the car. A single glimpse of the gold hanging down in the back changed the look in the man's eyes. No longer holding a polite and friendly gaze, his eyes became malicious, cold, and calculating. Nonchalantly, the man asked her about her interesting hair, wondering whether it's just a trend with young people these days. Embarrassed, Cassidy blushed, but quickly agreed that it's the latest trend to attach necklaces to your hair, like the Egyptians. The car turned down a smaller road, leading them deeper into the woods, but Cassidy was more absorbed in deflecting attention from her hair. As the man slid to a stop, Cassidy finally gathered that something was amiss. While she turned her head to look out the window in hopes of seeing the driveway to her house, the man reached out and yanked the golden strands that escaped from her cap, trying to rip them from her head. She screamed in pain as he tried to pull Cassidy from the passenger seat by her hair. He grasped the locks firmly, attempting again and again to pull the chains out. Unknown to the man, the gold began to wrap around his wrist, pulling him closer to the head of hair he was attempting to tear out. Like a snake pouncing on a small mouse, her red locks seized the man by the throat. Coiling around his neck, the air was being squeezed out of the man by the vicious strands. Meanwhile, Cassidy was clueless as to the work her hair was doing. As she was kicking and trying to grasp the door handle, behind her hair was in an epic battle. She heard struggling coming from the man, and then the pulling at her hair became less intense. All at once, with a gurgle, he let go, as did her battling tresses. She finally grasped the door handle and propelled herself out of the car and into a run. But as she turned to make sure he wasn't following her, she saw his bright red face as he began coughing and sputtering for air. His eyes were bulged and bloodshot, his skin was tinged blue, and around his neck a few strands of red hair twinkled in the sunlight that filtered through the treetops. Horrified that her devilish hair had almost been the end of him, she again began running, afraid of the man, afraid of the consequences, afraid that the police would throw her in a loony bin if she ever told the true story.